Okay, good evening. Thank you very much for being here. My co-chair, Carlos Ramirez, and I, Mayra Kirkendall Rodriguez, are grateful for your attendance. Of course, we're very grateful that the panel is here. I understand there's still people trying to find parking and so on and so forth, so hopefully there'll be more people joining us. For those of you who don't know, the Scarsdale Forum is a 100-year-old civic organization dedicated to researching, writing, and reporting upon important matters to our school district and to the village. Specifically, Carlos and I co-chair the Education Committee, and that's why we've organized this event, so that you can ask whatever questions you still have about the school bond. So I am pleased to have Ms. Pam Fuhrer, Mr. Scott Silberfein, and Mr. Bill Natbany, who are members of the Board of Education. We have Mr. Stuart Maddie, who is Assistant Superintendent. We also have Ms. Nina Cannon, also a member of the Board of Education here. We have Mr. Bastian to my left here, who is the Municipal Finance Advisor. And then we have Mr. Walsh, who is the architect, and these lady and gentlemen may perhaps join in depending on the kinds of questions. Their presentation is going to roughly be about 30 minutes, give or take. And at that point, I invite you to please come up to the microphone. I know that we are all going to be civil and respectful, ask our question, get an answer. And if you do not want to come up to the microphone, but you would like to ask a question, we have index cards and pens that will be distributed by Mr. John Benchy, Avital Saldatienko, Robert Berg, possibly maybe the vice president of the forum, John Mark. And of course, we thank John Mark and ML Perlman, the president of the forum, for allowing us to host this event. Most unfortunately, I hate to tell you that Dr. Hagerman's mother passed away. May her memory be a blessing, and he sends his deep regrets for not being able to attend. Gentlemen, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayra. So first I'd like to thank, on behalf of the board and the district, the Forum's Education Committee for inviting us to this public forum. It's very important that we are out and talking to and answering questions to our community residents and our stakeholders. We've been doing that a lot, and we really welcome and appreciate this opportunity to continue doing so. So Mayra has already introduced, I think, everyone who is here from us, so I won't do that again, but I will again express, and I know that Dr. Hagerman has great regret about not being able to be here tonight. Obviously, he's been instrumental in guiding our visions and our goals with respect to this bond and our educational vision in the district. And we obviously understand that he's with his family, and our wishes are with him and his family. So I'm going to start with a brief opening statement. Mr. Maddie will then have a presentation about the bond and the scope, and then we're basically here to answer your questions. So as most of you know, we are days away from the community vote on the school bond proposed by the board and the administration. There are clearly some differing viewpoints within the community, and debate and discussion is a good thing. Indeed, the scope, contents, and proposed implementation plan for this proposed bond and the projects benefited greatly over time from such community dialogue. Many of the comments and expressed viewpoints have been positive and supportive of the bond. Others raise questions or issues. We are here to present the facts and answer questions, and we're prepared to do so. I would like to note that there is a wealth of information out there about the proposed bond. The district website, which I think Jerry is kind of putting up on the screen, is a good place to start. It's been redesigned. There's a specific place to click on for the bond information. When you click on that, there are various bullets that you can go to see summaries by school with respect to what is in the proposed bond. We spent a fair amount of time reorganizing the website and the bond area of the website to make it more digestible for the community. There is a lot of information there. We urge you to go and look at the website. There are also copies of all the summary materials on the website, as well as some video descriptions and presentations about our vision, about the scope of the bond as well. Flyers have been sent to homes in the district. Information has been provided in various public forums and meetings with school and other community groups. I'm confident that many of you have seen board members and administrators at various recent community events. And yes, we still do answer questions by email or mail or by phone. So please, we urge you to become informed so you can vote with the requisite knowledge on February 8th. For those of you who are here, there are flyers right outside the door that list not only globally what the bond is about, but by, in fact, school and other information as well. I would also note that, and thank you to the Education Committee for previously providing us before today a list of about 15 or 16 different questions. We did work on those and provided back to the Forum Education Committee written answers to those questions. I'm not going to take time to read all those questions and answers, but they are out there, and Mr. Matty reminds me that they are now linked on our website as well, so that you can see them as well. But just because a question's been asked doesn't mean that you can't ask it or clarify here today. Again, we're here to answer questions. Mr. Matty will be presenting specifics about the bond and the process in a moment, but in general terms, the administration and board are asking the community to consider a significant bond in the amount of approximately $65 million to address the highest priority facilities items across the district, including a substantial renovation and expansion of Green Acres Elementary School. The process getting to this point has been long, comprehensive, analytical, and based upon a full review of facilities needs across the district and the district's educational goals. Before Mr. Matty begins, I wanted to address a few questions that keep surfacing, whether it be on social media or, as I go down the aisles in the grocery store. Some have asked why the board and the administration have not been out there campaigning and suggesting yes votes out in the community. Well, the bottom line is we cannot do so under the law. By proposing the bond, the board and administration have represented to the community that based on the years of discussions and analysis, the proposed bond is believed to be in the best interest of our community. It is now up to the community to decide whether they approve. Some of the recently expressed community comments echo emotionally charged statements already out in social media concerning the bond development process, the impact of a potential no vote, and the safety of our children during construction at Green Acres in particular. And I would like to address a few of those statements. Some comments or statements seek to assure the community that Green Acres will continue to get substantial investment or possibly get a new Green Acres school if this bond does not pass. And indeed, falsely claim that I have so represented. I have not made any such representations. For clarification purposes, here are my exact words from our last meeting, which are consistent with other previous and recent statements. And while there is a video posted on social media, it is a video that is excerpted and does not include this entire statement. So here it is. Given the need to address the health, security, and safety issues, it is unclear what impact there would be on the Green Acres renovation if the proposed bond does not pass. The board would have a number of options, and I cannot say or speculate what option the board would adopt. Community members have asked for assurances that no matter what, Green Acres will get a substantial portion of this bond. I cannot make that assurance on behalf of the board. Some have suggested that voting no on the bond would result in Green Acres getting a new school. To be clear, no one on this board has suggested that. Indeed, this board has previously rejected the idea of a new school for financial, among other reasons. I thus cannot affirm the new school speculation. What I can say is that this board and the administration worked long and hard to assemble a bond package that addresses competing priorities and believes that the bond proposal as crafted represents an important investment in our schools. So I hope, at least on that issue, that clarifies things. Other comments out in social media seem to suggest that the bond development process was rushed, held behind closed doors, or lacked public participation or input. The more than 3-year record on these issues, and in particular concerning Green Acres, speaks for itself. And Mr. Maddie will speak to that as well. Indeed, there has been no decision or action of this board that has occurred behind closed doors or without substantial public participation and comment. This long-lasting process has in fact benefited from and has been subject to change precisely because of the valuable input of many of our stakeholders. And that input has been greatly appreciated. We are thankful for that valuable input, which has assisted us along the way and made our proposal better and stronger in terms of benefiting our community. Some comments continue to suggest that the board and administration never really compared the costs of a Green Acre renovation or expansion versus a new building to rationally determine that a new building would in fact be substantially more expensive. That is simply not true. As early as June 2016, the board and district had new building drawings and estimates for a new building that well exceeded $50 million. And further cost estimates of a new building a year later, checked by 2 independent consulting firms, put the cost of a new building at around $30 million more than the proposed renovation. All of this information has been publicly available. These are the facts. Some people may not like them, but they are what they are. Mr. Manning will further address this issue as well, and Mr. Walsh and others are here as well to address that issue. Finally, we have seen comments in which residents express anger or disappointment about revaluation, federal tax reform legislation, and the inability to prepay school taxes. Of course, these are important issues in our community, but I must emphasize that those issues are unrelated to any actions that this school board or this administration have taken. What we look at is what is best for our community and our children and our schools. So finally, this should be an exciting time for our district. There are not many school districts that have the ability and the wherewithal to make this kind of substantial investment in a community's jewel of an asset. We understand that there are conflicting feelings out there in the community. And all we as a board can hope for is that our community will research the true facts and come to independent decisions based on those true facts. While different groups may have different immediate agendas, our agenda as a community should be to do what is best for our community, best for our schools, and best for our children. We ask you all in the community to make that determination on your own and use your right to express your opinion and vote next Thursday, February 8th, at the middle school. So that concludes my opening remarks, and I'm going to turn the presentation over to Mr. Mack.
Thank you very much, Bill. So what I would like to do is take you through the bond development process, followed by the proposed scope, then a little bit through the finances behind the proposed bond. So the 2018 bond process actually began with the planning for the 2014 bond project, which is now well underway in our buildings. At that time, Green Acres was identified as a building needing additional care, additional attention, and that the scope that was anticipated would not fall within the level of debt falling off for a tax neutral bond at that time. At that point, a Green Acres feasibility study committee was put together. KG and architects were hired to help with that process, a feasibility study. And the feasibility committee met throughout the spring of 2015 and early summer of 2015. That committee put together a report And basically, the outcome was that they really had no recommendation for the Board of Education, other than leaving the building as is and making sure that the Board of Education and future committees would take that and educational adequacy into account when studying the building. Soon after that, facility studies were done at all of our buildings by KG&D architects. Building condition studies are mandated by the State Education Department. We get them done every 5 years. Really a thorough look at all of our buildings, identifying more infrastructure type items in all of our spaces. And if Green Acres community members are here, you might recall that we actually came out to Green Acres and had a presentation about that probably almost 2 years ago now. So the facility studies were done identifying these needs across the district. At the same time, knowing that additional debt service would be falling off the books after the 18-19 school year, I began to form building committees at each building consisting of faculty members, principals, and parent members, looking at not only the building condition items identified, but also looking at how can we improve these buildings for the educational experience and users of those spaces. I think we had probably 6 to 7 meetings in each of the buildings. The feasibility committee at Green Acres was actually reconvened based on the no recommendation from the previous feasibility committee. And we met throughout the spring of 2015 and into 2016. Again, unfortunately, coming to the same result of make sure as you continue these studies, educational adequacy, but do not leave the building as is. And it's important to say that feasibility committee was made up of a cross-section of teachers, parents, community members, administrators, board members, and we had a village representative as well. At that point, we began to make some presentations at the Board of Education meetings. We had a lot of differing feedback from the community, and the district decided to take a pause. During that time, we did an RFP process for a new architect. And through that open process, we did, I think, at least 2 or 3 nights worth of interviews in public. We sent RFPs to a broad range of publications. I think we had about 16 or 17 applications and proposals. We whittled that down to 5 or 6. We interviewed and we selected BBS architects based on their vast experience, billions of dollars worth of experience in New York State construction. That was just about a year ago, which is hard to believe. Mr. Walsh and I were talking about that earlier this evening. Right upon hiring, they hit the ground running in a very, I would say, unique way of looking at our buildings in Scarsdale as opposed to past projects. Not only did they begin a review of all of our facilities, similar to the past architects, but I would say actually more in depth. They walked every inch of every building that we have. I think one of the other great features of BBS is not only are they an architectural firm, they're also an engineering firm. So it's all under one roof, working in concert with one another. So the engineers, architects walked every building. And Kevin, Mr. Walsh, who's here with us this evening, offers that other unique perspective where he looks at the spatial review and spatial analysis of all of our buildings. And what that meant during this process is taking time and meeting with our building principals, meeting with our teachers. I believe you met with some parents as well, understanding how each building functions and meeting Scarsdale Education for Tomorrow, really the goals and objectives of our educational program, and really understanding that. As a result of both of those studies, and they sort of collide into a sort of a massive possibility of projects.
I could just add one point.
Sure, yeah.
Just to show you the strength and the breadth of the work that these architects did. You know, this was not just a walkthrough of buildings and saying, oh, that looks like it needs fixing, or we're missing this. I mean, we were finding out things that other people had missed, that other architects and people who had gone through the buildings had missed. I mean, we found out that there were ventilator units that were supposed to be bringing fresh air into the building, hadn't been working for what, decades? Or years
Actually,
at least?
Not in existence.
Or not in existence, yeah. So this was a really top to bottom evaluation of what the needs of each building were. I'm sorry to interrupt, Steve.
And so I will say that was not unique. We knew that they weren't in existence, but we had previously been told that they were grandfathered and okay by SED. And checking with SED and realizing that indeed this was the case, that's not something that we could live with, which is why it's in the scope. So part of, again, these two studies really collided into a very large scope of items, both from spatial analysis, what could possibly make our buildings work better from an educational standpoint, but also from a facility standpoint as well. And the unique thing and the great thing I think about the facility side of it, not only did we have the previous work of KG&D, the older architects, but we had this fresh look as well from a new set of architects and engineers. And then sitting down, bringing those two studies together with our facilities team, mapping out, okay, what makes sense, what's a high priority, what do we need to take care of, safety, security, electrical issues, roofing issues, all of those things coming together for an initial proposed scope. Those scopes were presented in the late spring. Very thorough meetings. We had some pretty good attendance at those meetings where BBS presented their findings and had those conversations throughout the spring, leading up to a July 6th meeting with the Board of Education. And at that meeting, the recommendation at that point, or by BBS and supported by administration to the Board of Education, and then subsequently supported by the Board of Education, was a project that would be focused on building condition items, health, safety, security systems of the buildings, and a renovation and expansion of Green Acres based on their analysis of that space. To not only make that space educationally adequate as sort of laid out as a priority by the feasibility committees and based on the work of BBS, but also their work in making sure that that building is safe and sound, looking out many years into the future. The other item that was a priority and guideline given to us by the Board of Education at that meeting was tax neutrality, maintaining that level of taxpayer impact or taxpayer share of any debt service remain at or near where the district's current level or current debt service level is. So moving forward from that meeting in July, and again we had public meetings along the way. Work, of course, continued in the summer as scope refined. BBS was at work refining plans for Green Acres. And again, Bill was correct that these plans changed over time. And I think if you went to the meetings in the spring, you saw different design changes along the way. We also brought all these back to the original building committees at each building, so they understood the scope of the proposals, including Green Acres as well, with different constituents on board for those meetings. Towards the end of the spring, the district formed building committees at Green Acres to really focus on the proposal, how that, getting a lot of concern about safety and security during construction, how will the building logistically function. So we did form that committee, and we met, I believe, about 8 times throughout the fall. And then at the same time, we had a district-wide feasibility committee looking at the scope as a whole from a district-wide perspective, again, with community members, parents and administrators and board members on those committees. The Board of Education had presentations throughout the fall, updates from the committees, and then including environmental input during the secret process from our consultants, working with community members to ultimately lead up to adoption of the final proposed scope that we know today in mid-December. This work that is proposed, it's certainly not all inclusive. There's a lot of work identified by BBS during their studies. I think I was looking earlier this evening, I think it was $256 million, like everything. Of course, that was whittled down a lot to this project, and a lot of it say, well, we're going to put this off and leave that to future study. So what are those sort of future study things that are still out there? One of them is air conditioning. Air conditioning came up as a primary item by the building committee, sort of the users of the building, the parents in those buildings, concerned about those times of the years when the rooms get very warm and uncomfortable. Food service is something that we continue to look at. Food service is a proposal at Green Acres, a kitchen in the new Learning Commons area, similar to what Quaker Ridge would have or does have in the elementary buildings. That would leave 3 elementary buildings without food service. In working with the PTA will be getting out of the food service business starting next year. The district does have food service committees made up of parents and school administrators, and working with a consultant to come up with a plan for delivery of food service starting next year. It's important to note that would not impact the budget or taxes. That operates much like a small business, where the revenues of selling the food offset the cost of offset the cost of running the program. So that runs outside of the general fund. Another item is parking. Parking came up at Green Acres as a concern. If we've driven through there, we know it's tight and not a lot of space. That came up as a concern. We're still studying that. It's actually a concern in all of our buildings. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had this year with different things happening at Quaker Ridge and Fox Meadow and Edgewood. We are working through all of them and are going to look at it universally, and we anticipate handling that through future bond appropriations and working with committees to figure out what the best plan is for not only Green Acres but all of our buildings. Okay. And the other item is sustainability. So these projects will be, if successful, would be constructed with a sustainability lens, meaning products and project specifications would be assuring that products that are used are sustainable in nature. It will not be a LEED project, but it will be LEED-like project. However, looking at sustainability type project scope items, we do have a district-wide sustainability committee looking at a possible scope of items at some point in the future. We originally were planning on an EPC, if you were with us through the bond process. And then looking at that, we realized that there's really more work to be done looking at the finances. When you tear it apart, it doesn't make a lot of sense. If the projects are worthy, if there's a good payback period, if we value them as a school district and a community, then we should be able to support them as part of a budget process or a small bond and go to the voters like that. District-wide facilities committee or district-wide sustainability committee is meeting to discuss those items, things such as solar panels, LED lighting, and whatnot. Okay, so the scope of the project. Are you there, Jerry? Yep. Okay. So again, the scope, the proposed scope of the project with a focus on building condition items, health, safety, and security in all buildings. Health, safety, and security, what does that mean? Bill already mentioned at Edgewood and Fox Meadow, updating and installing mechanical fresh air systems. In this case, those two schools, they do not have mechanical fresh air systems. The fresh air is opening a window. So this project would take care of that in those two buildings in particular, and then more or less in other buildings across the district, updating unit ventilators, installing unit ventilators where they may not be. In Green Acres, same sort of building condition type items as well, replacing the 1960s type unit ventilators that are Green Acres now. They actually work. So they do have mechanical fresh air exchange, where Edgewood and Fox Meadow do not, but they are older and they don't bring in the fresh air up to current code. So we are recommending replacing them. Other major items as far as health, safety, security, a big one is boilers. 12 boilers across the district. It was incredible when we were able to replace these particular 12 back in 1990 as part of a bond back then. It was great, but now we are a long way away from that. And then just to add a little substance to that, on my way in this morning, I had an email from our facilities director. One of our boilers at the high school, we have 4 of them. One we've had a lot of particular trouble with, went out, major leaks. We're calling the people in. They can't get here till tomorrow, so the boiler's offline. We're anticipating about a $30,000 replacement of a boiler part. And this has been ongoing. So it's real, and we will have to take care of them. It's at one point or another, but soon. Other big item is roofs, similar story. So we've been really good at budgeting dollars and doing preventative maintenance on all of our facilities, and I would say roofs in particular. The majority of our roofs are out of warranty. We had a master roof study done about a year and a half or so ago when I first got here, realizing our roofs hadn't been really touched in a long time. What is our liability moving out into the future? So the study really maps out the condition of every foot of every roof that we have in the district and anticipated life left on that roof. So we really have a good map of that. And what's reflected in this project are those roofs that are really due to be replaced in the time period of the bond. The one, if you look at Heathcote, that entire roof is due to be replaced as part of this proposed bond scope. So we've done a good job, but it is coming time where they need to be replaced. And I will say it's not full roof at a time. We really look at it by section by section. So we're not going to replace a full roof if a full roof doesn't need to be replaced. We'll replace a section of roof that would need to be replaced to try to be as financially prudent as possible. Another big part of the facilities is updating our electrical panels. Not only updating them because they're old, but adding them where it's appropriate to keep up with today's technological needs. Updating plumbing where necessary, masonry. Again, that's an ongoing thing across the district. We have older buildings, as you know. We do get seepage in certain areas. So this would address major trouble, or the primary trouble areas. And also such things as exhaust systems in different parts of our buildings. At the high school, again, all of those things, but one highlighted item would be renovations at Dean Field. Dean Field, it's a lovely field. It hasn't been touched in a long, long time. So if you've had kids out there playing in the early spring, you're fortunate because it gets very wet out there. We had to cancel a lot of games. And not only is drainage a major issue, for not only district but community use, the field is not level. So there's lips on the field. We put a Band-Aid on it a couple of years ago to keep it going, but it certainly wasn't the correction that needs to bring it up to a safe playing space. And of course, part of this would be repositioning it so balls would not be coming in play, adequate space between home plate and the backstop, leveling the football field, and so on. Another major topic would be ADA compliance across all of our buildings. BBS, again, in reviewing all of our facilities, there's a lot of areas that aren't currently welcoming to all of our students, all of our community members, and we really want to make sure that we get those up to date. Handrails, ramps, door closers, water fountains, across the board, across the district. It's easy to think that they're sort of nickel and dime projects, and we are picking off some of the easier ones, but when you have a scope that large, it's much more efficient to spec them out, have one contractor across the district to take care of them, so you're uniform and you know what's happening, again, uniformly all across the district at the same time. And then security vestibules, going back to the building committees, came up as a major item. And it's also best practice and common practice if you've been to elementary buildings or schools in other areas. Adding security vestibules to all of our elementary buildings. This will be another level of security. How it would work is you would ring the outside buzzer, you would be buzzed, a visitor would be buzzed into a space. That might happen now, but now if you go into that space, you could actually walk right into the building. So there would be an additional layer, locked door that would be buzzable, if that's a word, into the next room, or into the building after being vetted by somebody through a pass-through window. We would anticipate probably having some sort of, they have computers or software systems now where you can run a person's license or some sort of ID, make sure that they're on the list to be able to pick up a child or to be in the building. And we anticipate, for parents, of course, it'd be like that first time that you might have a pass for the year, so you're not doing that every single time. But really just making sure that we have that extra level of security in our buildings. Along with that would be security cameras. One of the questions was, how would that work? This would really be a base level system. So we're anticipating probably 8 to 10 cameras in each building. We would work, I'm not going to tell you where each and every one is because we don't know yet, but we will be working with our district level and building level teams, village police, district security consultant, based on best practice, obviously keeping an eye on the front door. I'll tell you where those will be. And making sure, again, that our buildings are as safe and secure as we can make them. And that is, those are the major points. Again, a lot of the details are in the handouts that were provided, and of course, all online. Financially, what does this mean? An important aspect of this and the guidance from the Board of Education was tax neutrality. And it does, this proposed scope does result in that. Again, it is always projections because I can't predict interest rates a couple of years from now. But working with our municipal consultant, financial consultant, and running those projections, and of course knowing what our debt service now, the taxpayer impact as a result of taking on additional debt if this bond were to pass would be at, or actually projections maybe even slightly less than where we currently are for taxpayer share of debt service. Yes, I didn't talk about the Green Acres expansion. That's a good note. So in addition to, so there's a wonderful handout out there. Of course, we have some renderings. But the Green Acres expansion, along with the facility upgrades for the current space, is an expansion of the current building. In that expansion would be moving the current 4th and 5th grade, which is the double stack of classrooms on the north side of the building, and moving those out into the expanded wing, along with a learning commons, which would serve as a sort of a common area, and those renderings sort of show you like the big idea of what they'll be used for. And also, that would also be used for an eating space, along with a multi-purpose room. In working with the spatial analysis, when Kevin went and really understood how that building breathed on a day-to-day basis, what it needed to do and what it couldn't do because of the space that it's currently in. This design does provide that. It gets, if you're familiar with the building, there's currently students down in the basement area, which are a disenfranchised part of the building, but it's really not part of the everyday life. They're off by themselves. So the idea of getting those students back up into the main part of the building, giving that building an additional multi-purpose space. Now they only have one, the other buildings all have two, to have all of those things that happen in a building on a day-to-day basis, whether it's an extra gym space, recess area, a common type learning area, indoor recess. All these things have to happen in these common spaces. And by the way, lunch is pretty crazy when you're serving it in one area. So the idea, again, through the drawings and through his analysis, and through presentation and feedback from the community and the Board of Education, was to have this wonderful learning common space overlooking the field area with another smaller multi-purpose room, providing all this additional space for the building to really come up to the level of the other buildings And I would dare say maybe just leap ahead a little bit with the addition of the learning commons, the sort of the big idea of that common space, and looking and meeting Scarsdale Education for Tomorrow, and all of those expectations. Interior at Green Acres too, in addition to all of those electrical panels, small roof replacement, not much roof replacement in Green Acres, and unit ventilator and upgrades. We also are proposing doing interior classroom upgrades as well, which will be sort of the test case for a lot of our other buildings. So all of our buildings, well, many of our buildings are similar vintage, high school, elementary buildings, and we're really looking at how the buildings, or the rooms in those buildings, function on a day-to-day basis. Again, it's at 2.0, that's Scarsdale Education for Tomorrow, looking how those spaces can improve in delivering that education. So, how does storage? Do we really need as much storage as we have now? Can we think about that differently? Can we think about tables and chairs and furniture, how that best works? So Green Acres will be that first sort of out of the block. We do have some rooms across the district. If you've been in those, I know Fox Meadow has a couple spaces that are really up and running as well. Green Acres will be a building-wide renovation and look at that. So those committees with a authorized bond proposal would take place in the spring. And we would actually look at that district-wide and involve teachers and administrators from the other buildings. So as we look at that into the future, how do we want those spaces to look at? So that's another neat thing that's proposed for Green Acres. And of course, part of the design concept and upgrades for that building is all keeping that historical preservation mindset. It is does qualify, I think, to be on that list. It's not on the list, but it's qualified, eligible. So all of the designs have to be true to that historical nature, both exterior and interior. So that would all be taken into account as well.
Before I just turn it over to any other board members that wanted to say a few words, I think it's important to also understand with respect to Green Acres that they've waited a long time to have some work done. All the other schools, whether it be the middle school or high school and other elementary schools, have had additions, renovations, common space added. Prior board basically said that we needed to study Green Acres more to understand what was exactly needed because there was a lot to be done. And it basically made a commitment to Green Acres to consider having a portion of this bond dedicated to Green Acres. And if you listen to Sharon Hill, the current principal at Green Acres, she's been to a number of these presentations. She has said very much how the lack of space and the lack of common space that exists in the school really impacts their ability to do the things that they want to do and has an impact on curriculum. So the design and the hope is that by adding these spaces and bringing Green Acres to a level where we can really have the 21st century education that we want, that will bring Green Acres, to a level of commitment that was made to other schools too, in the sense of having common spaces and other things added in the past that Green Acres hasn't had a chance to benefit from yet. I don't know if Mr. Silverfine or Ms. Fuhrer or Ms. Cannon had anything they wanted to add briefly before we turn it open to questions. Okay.
Thank you, Bill.
Oh, yes.
I was just thinking, in adding to the Green Acres changes, we also are moving things around so that the building functions better in terms of its support services. They will all now be contiguous in one hallway, very accessible to the lower grades especially. And then there'll be a music hallway, so all the music components will be aligned together. So even just within the building, the change in flow will have an impact on programming.
Thanks, Monsieur. Okay, well, I think we're ready for questions if you have any.
Yes, please, go ahead and come up if you have any questions. If you prefer to send it on an index card, we have Avital Salatienko and Robert Bird there available. If you want an index card, just raise your hand and we'll give you a card with a pen, and then we can pose the question for you anonymously. Otherwise, please come up to the microphone, and then I'm also checking on Facebook to see if people have questions, and I might come back and send them that way. So please, come up.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I'm Steve Scheller, I'm a 30-year resident of Green Acres, children and my grandchildren in the school. Two questions, or one real question. It's one thing to manage a project on one site. This is a very complicated project management challenge to multiple, and the worry I would have is construction creep or project creep and cost creep. So the project management is key. Is that being really built in very tightly so that you don't see it sort of getting away from you in terms of managing these costs?
Agreed, absolutely. We did do a proposal for a construction management firm. They're not here with us this evening. Again, I think we had, I don't know, 6 different proposals. And one of the key criteria that we used in vetting the proposals was experience with large projects, management coming in on budget, and paying attention to that. Not only that was making sure that they were allotting and that we were planning on enough people that the construction management firm would be providing. So I believe we have 2 or 2.5 people, individuals at Green Acres. However, there's projects going on in the other buildings as well. So we would have an individual at each of those spaces as well, managing those projects when they're happening. So a Green Acres individual construction management representative would not be drawn to another building. We would plan our meetings such that they wouldn't interfere as least as possible with what's going on at the buildings as well. Specifically at Green Acres, with the type of work that's going on with the expansion. This was a major concern of the Green Acres Building Committee, and it's our concern, of course, as well, the safety and security of the site, interaction with students and teachers and community members. So we, they'll be working, I pointed they're not here, working with them, and they already have way down the line in the process with their CIP plans and making sure that will be happening.
Yeah, because my other question is, doing this kind of construction, major construction in Green Acres, whilst kids are in school, I know that's been people's challenge. So I think the clearer you can be about how you're going to safeguard the safety of the kids while they're there. You're not doing all the construction in the summertime, obviously you can't. So that would be very important, I think, to reassure families.
Yeah, and then just to be clear with the community, once again, is that the expansion work, the work outside of the current envelope of the building, that work will be occurring, during the months when school is in session. However, the renovation work is summer only. So the renovation work inside the building will be summer only. And make sure all the barriers are there in place. And we've had a lot of conversations with the community about that. Not only, wood paneling, but making sure that we actually have walls up and all those barriers in place, construction fencing, and every type of thing that we can do to make that space secure. And the important thing too is, if you're involved in construction, things change on a daily basis. So assuring that communication is there between the building representatives, custodians, the principal, the teachers, construction manager on site, and the contractors. How does that communication work? And we feel very comfortable with that. And then, if we get to that point, if the bond is authorized, as we get closer, all those plans will be firmed right up to the tiniest little dot to make sure everyone's comfortable, and making sure that we communicate with the community to make sure that they're comfortable as well.
So, Ms. Cannon.
Yeah, no, so I just wanted to add a little bit to the response that you did. You were very mindful. Oh, thank you. Sure. We were very mindful of the concerns of the community with respect to the fact that construction was taking place on the addition while the children were in school, specifically with respect to noise levels and with respect to air quality. And so the board did actually take the step to add onto the proposal a dedicated noise control monitor. And also, in terms of the air quality, there will be an ongoing daily monitoring of the air quality. So this will be something that will be constantly monitored. It won't be something that where, you know, the noise gets so loud that a teacher has to complain to the principal before we can take action to actually remedy the issue. This will be something that will be ongoing because we are very mindful of it. In addition, I know that we approved additional HEPA filters to make sure that we had proper, again, quality air that was being added into the classrooms. And we did also approve the air conditioning in the library space because we felt that that area was contiguous to the location where the construction was going on with the expansion. So we wanted to make sure that those windows didn't need to be opened so that noise and dust possibly could then get into those areas. So we really tried to be mindful of all of these concerns.
Thanks. I also did want to say that you mentioned cost, and obviously there are appropriate contingencies, in the project costs as well. I don't want to spend a lot of time, but they are in there.
Any questions? We also have Mr. Walsh, the architect, and we also have Mr. Bastian, the municipal finance advisor. So
I want to talk to the municipal finance advisor. He never gets any questions. Can you talk about what kind of rate we're looking at, what the term of the bond deal would be, and what is your experience with failed bond deals? There seems to be some hope in a segment of the community that a no vote would engender a bigger bond later. Could you talk about whether you've actually seen some examples of that?
Okay, we'll give that a shot. In our projections, what we've run so far for the district is the serial bond, and we've used 4% for the serial bond interest rate. I did a couple other quick calculations for tonight too to see what if the interest rate was 4.5, what if it was 5%, right? Because we're about 2 years out before any bonds might be sold, probably 2.5 years out. If it's successful. You have a pristine credit rating, as you all know that, for your school district. There are 8 school districts in New York State with a Moody's AAA, and you are one of them. So again, congratulations on that. So that's factored in, and that's why we're looking at such a low interest rate. One of the key factors too that we would have is with that interest rate, we've gone with a 17-year payback to match up to the state building aid that would be coming in, to try to keep those more or less aligned through the years. And you have, again, 19.5% building aid, so that's a key to have coming in. As we talked about earlier, you have a very nice drop-off in existing debt service coming up here in a couple of years. So what most districts around the state is, what they do is they're trying to plan with their needs that they have to see if they can fit that in. And your timing is working out very well. That fits in very nicely with that drop-off. And that further helps you with your levy cap calculations that we all have to do with the new tax cap calculations with the state. So that's another benefit of helping keep that consistent from year to year. It does not swing around your tax rate per se. Let me see, did I answer all the questions on the interest rate?
In the term, good.
Okay.
How about examples of what happens if they fail?
If the bond?
If bonds fail, bond votes fail.
Okay.
What typically happens? They come back with a quick bond, does no bond happen, does a bigger bond happen? Is it a 6-month wait, is it a 2-year wait?
Right, there are state laws about a 90-day wait and a 1-year wait. So our bond counsel firm, the legal attorneys, would walk us through those situations if we had something like that before you could come back with essentially the same vote. So there are legal limits within New York State to do something like that. If you come back with a different vote, those dates might be different. But there are limits within New York State on coming back with a similar referendum within 90 days or 1 year.
Just the last follow-up, there's like about 66 million of undone work in this bond. If we wanted to do all that right now, how much more would it cost us, principal and interest? It should be about the same as the retiring, right?
Right. The projection that we have right now for the current bond, which is just slightly under $65 million, the debt service is around $5 million a year, $5.3 million a year, and that, again, is fitting into the drop-off. So there's aid ceilings that we have to calculate with building aid that factor into it also. So, again, if you tried to double that, I would have to recalculate what the aid ceilings are that we would be using, and it would depend on what buildings you're doing that work at. So that's kind of a tough question to answer now unless I had more specifics on you're doing 10 million at this elementary building or 15 million, because the aid ceilings come into play. Again, 19.5% of aid is enough aid that we want to match up your debt service to where the aid is flowing with. So I would really want to fine tune that. That's part of our job for you folks.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm a Green Acres mom with 2 kids who are currently in the school, and I know there's been a ton of concern about asbestos as well as lead paint. Can you just address for us sort of how you're going to handle that through the construction, and like what will the impact be, you know, on the children, or do you don't see that as an issue? What could it possibly be?
Sure. Well, we take it very seriously. As part of our pre-planning during this process, we've actually gone ahead and done some testing in the building. I believe they are up on the website. I don't know if you've seen them or not. So our initial tests, and this, we weren't going into walls, but all of our initial tests for asbestos showed that we did not have any asbestos. And we tested every part of the building, so different ages. However, that doesn't mean that we won't come across asbestos once we start doing some demolition during the summer months. And same thing with lead. We went ahead and tested all the different spaces for lead as well. Not that we don't think that we'll have to do some lead abatement. So with a past bond, so it's fantastic we have all this upfront information as a basis for moving ahead. If the bond were passed during the specification of the plan or the development of the specifications, which is a lengthy process, all that detailed work, engineers would really get into those spaces, further analysis would be done, and scopes would be put together, taking into account the fact that it's quite possible you might run into asbestos in this area or that area. So there's dollars built into the project for those contingencies in this scope that you see. If asbestos is found, there are very specific regulations that the district must abide by in abating those projects. And we do asbestos abatement every single summer. If not during the school year, when school's not in session. Happens every single year in every single building, including Green Acres. Notices go up on the door. This would be in the summer. In this particular case, all of it is double-lined plastic, and I'm not an expert asbestos abatement person, but I've been through many abatement projects. The pressure takes dust particles out into a certain area. It's all contained and done by certified professionals, asbestos abatement contractors, overseen by third-party individuals, monitoring agents that monitor the areas outside of that contained area to make sure that nothing comes out of that space when the plastic is opened for people going in and out. And that space is not open until all those air machines testing is clear. So on top of that, we also have the construction managers that'll be on site managing that from another set of eyes. So it's eyes on eyes on eyes. And again, it's done all under regulation. This is, it's not a mom and pop operation where someone shows up with a pickup truck and scrapes off asbestos. It's all very, very controlled and contained. And the same for lead as well. New York State certifications, New York State specifications, clearances, and that space is not opened for kids and students or even other contractors until they are cleared.
And those would
I
only
just-
be touched during the summer when the
Right.
children are not there.
Yes.
We're only building the
Correct.
extension on
Absolutely
when the
correct.
children are there. So it's only new construction while the children are there, so none of this could even stir up
That's
because the
correct.
children wouldn't be there.
Right, so abatement typically, or asbestos will be found during a demolition type process, which would typically occur towards the beginning of construction for trying to get those spaces opened up, which would give plenty of time in the schedule to take care of that. And again, demolition, abatement, all of that would occur only in the summer months as part of the interior renovation, long before students and teachers would come back. And again, they have to be cleared. All that stuff has to be cleared and signed, and goes back to the monitoring agency's office. They check all the reports and before you get the actual clearance.
I don't want that point to be lost because it is the most important. No interior demolition, no interior with the kids in the school. That was very important to the board. That was something.
It's actually law.
And I'm told it's law, but that was something we discussed at length. And as part of the proposal.
Good evening. My name is Peter Gelfman, 106 Bright Avenue, proud graduate of Green Acres and Scarsdale High School. I applaud you for all the work and all the meetings and the hours, not 1, not 2, but 3 years. Personally, I'm in favor of the bond. I've already voted absentee, but I think the prior questioner was onto something. I know the board would prefer to think positive and it's going to pass, but I think it may be useful, unfortunately, to recognize the fact that there's a determined group, an organized group that wants to vote it down for their own well-intentioned reasons that they see. I disagree, but would you care to speculate and talk about what the board's appetite? Some were voting it down because they want it bigger. Some were voting it down because they're determined to get a new school. I don't think we're going to have new schools at Edgewood, Fox Meadow, but who knows what the future brings. I think you have a well-developed plan after 3 years, and I hope it passes, but it might help educate other voters who are under the delusion that you're suddenly going to come back with a twice as big bond if this goes down.
Thank you for your question. I think I've been asked that a number of times and have tried to answer it as best I can. As board president, I can't speak for the board because the board only acts as a group of 7. We don't act individually. I think in my opening statement I did indicate that with respect to a new school, that this board had already determined that because of financial reasons and other reasons, including the other priorities in the district, and frankly the strong bones of the Green Acres School, that a new school was not the prudent option to pursue. Someone can quibble about whether it's going to be $10 million or $30 million or more dollars, but it's clearly going to be more expensive than a renovation or expansion. You heard that we have $100 and some odd million in projects that we'd like to do over the years. So, I wish I could say if the bond went down, we'd do X, Y, or Z. I can't. I think that the board probably has an obligation to do the most priority items as quickly as possible when you're talking about safety, when you're talking about ADA compliance, when you're talking about security. So, I certainly think the board will consider that, but, you are right in the sense that there are a number of people and groups that are looking to see what would happen if there is a no vote. I wish I could give you more specific information and say this is what will happen. I think we would have to deal with those security and safety issues, as a priority. And then I think we'd have to discuss what our priorities are. I mean, if you look at the comments out there, I mean, there are some people that are asking, shouldn't we spend $23 million on air conditioning the district instructional spaces rather than spending $35 million at Green Acres? So I don't know where those priorities are going to come out, with further discussion, because obviously if the bond does not go through, we will have to have discussion with the community and see, where we are. But I don't know where those priorities are going to come out. I do know that we have things we have to do, and those aren't going to change. So I think we have to do the things that we have to do, get those done quickly, and then see where our priorities and goals are in discussion with the community going forward. But, as I said in the opening statement, I can't sit here and say, don't worry, there's still $35 million for Green Acres if the bond does not pass. Nor can I say that there won't be. I mean, I don't want to leave anyone with an impression that there's some, plan that has been considered. We believe the bond is, a bond that is best for the community, and we put it out there, and now it's up to the community to decide. And if anybody else wants to comment, that's at least the best take I can give you.
First of all, thank you so much for all your work. I also was a Green Acres alumni, and now I'm so for me, this is such a no-brainer, considering, I think the curtains are the same as when I went there in the gym. So, I'm really grateful for all the work that you guys have done. But speaking sort of what people are saying in the Green Acres community, there's talk about mold in the building, that, it's making people sick. So there's all this sort of this undercurrent of folklore, and I really would like to hear what your response is to that, and to sort of eliminate that as a reality.
Do you want to start? You want to start, or
We can start generally.
Okay. Well, I think that, first of all, I think we've had the testing done about what's going on in the building. And I think the report that we have is this is not a sick building. We understand that there were some issues in the basement. They've been remediated. We understand that there was one of the ventilators wasn't working downstairs? Dehumidifier wasn't working. That's been fixed. It is an old building. Can I sit here and say there will never, ever be an ounce of mold in the building ever again in the basement? No, I can't. But it's not a problem where my understanding and the board's understanding is that it's at a level of concern where you're having a sick building. This is not an issue that is uncommon to buildings of this nature and school buildings all around. And we are taking remedial measures and are very comfortable with them. I don't know if you want to go from there.
Yeah, and that's not only Green Acres, it's in all of our buildings. So, we are introducing a proactive approach moving forward with the indoor air quality testing every year. Rolling out our first budget, I think we'll be planning on spending about $100,000 a year, and then just being more proactive about it. I think, in general, looking at Green, I've been here 2.5 years, and looking at past projects and looking at how they were sort of done over the years. Green Acres, it hasn't received a lot of love over the years. It really hasn't. Same curtains, right? So, and I think Green Acres has been sort of, well, what are we doing with Green Acres? What are we doing with Green Acres? And in the meantime, not a lot was done with Green Acres. We are now on top of it. We've done a lot of work. Hopefully, if you're in the building now with students, that you've noticed a difference internally in that building. There's some simple things you can do, and we're really trying to make sure that those are done. Our people in the building are more attuned to it. Our teachers are more attuned to it. That we need to take care of the spaces that we're in to make them a better space. Those are simple things. And working with mold, air quality, simple things are being more aware of their spaces. So that starts with our custodial and cleaning crews all the way up. Let's be proactive, more proactive. Let's make sure we put the eyes where we know there could be issues in every building. Edgewood has spaces that we have to be aware of. A high school has similar spaces. they have basement areas. So we've talked to all of our people, we are more proactive. In addition, we'll be doing the testing as well to stay on top of that.
Stuart, can you just go back to Thanksgiving time and talk about, I think, the actual test? I think it was 4 out of 400 sites that were found to have a potentially elevated level.
We tested 47 different areas, 10 different types of testing, types of things that we tested for. Of those 470 areas, I think 4 came back for a probability of mold growth. Like there's different ranges, and I'm not a hygienist, but we did have a hygienist do this. So, you know, we have sinks in all of our buildings, right? Sinks, kids, messes. We need to make sure that we pick up and are aware of those, because that's all mold, like just like in our bathrooms and kitchens and all of that. So we weren't happy that that was found, but we found it, and maybe I think it's a learning lesson, or a lesson to be learned for all of us that use all of our buildings. We just have to be aware of it.
And remediated and retested.
We remediated and retested. Correct.
And there's another retest coming up.
Correct. Yeah.
And with the bond, you're moving all the kids out of the basement completely, is that right?
As part of the proposed renovation, the instructional spaces will be coming out of the basement areas.
You know, I think it's worth just to mention too, I mean, I know your question was more directly related to mold and things like that, but you know, all of our board members have been through the Green Acres building. I mean, I recall, and I've told this story before, and I'll tell it again, which is when we were first debating the issue of what to do with Green Acres building. You know, all the board members took a tour, and I don't mean walking the halls, I mean going down into the basements, looking in the crawl spaces, you know, examining the boilers. I mean, you know, I was with John Trenholm and the custodians with Mr. Moore, and I remember it very well. I mean, literally, you know, doing a full-scale, you know, evaluation of this building, you know, going to every space. And I recall Mr. Moore and I walking out of the building at that time and going, you know, how the heck can we ever tear this building down? I mean, it's a beautiful building, it's a strong building, you know, and as our architects keep telling us, you don't need to tear it down. You know, it's got good bones. You know, is it perfect? No building is perfect. Do we think that there are imperfections we can deal with on a forward-going basis and make this a great place, you know, for decades to come? Absolutely, and that's why we're doing it this way.
Just one quick thing. Do you remember the fire alarm that went off on a real rainy day a couple of weeks ago?
Yeah.
That's part of, unfortunately, that was a result of some of our proactive work. They were actually painting down the basement that set the alarm off. So it's, you know, trying to, you know, we should take care of those spaces and paint on a regular basis.
Right.
Just
Yeah. Okay, so I just wanted to add to your comment, because I think, you know, I think we are mindful of that sort of folklore or the sense you have heard from the community about not just specifically mold that's testable, but maybe moisture, or the sense that maybe things aren't as fresh, and I think we tried very hard to incorporate all of that into the design. Specifically in the basement, we're not only moving students out of the basement, so there will be no learning space down there, but we're also incorporating into the construction the commercial grade dehumidification system, which is a much stronger and more permanent system than what we currently have there. In addition, just in terms of moisture or the sense that things have sort of a smell of mildew, remember, we're really renovating all of those spaces. So essentially, they're getting new, just new repurposed construction. All of those spaces will be essentially be part of the construction. So it will be new, it will be dry, it will be removed of whatever, I guess, remnants of moisture that exists there. I mean, I think we really did try to take that into account. And just to echo, you know, what Mr. Napney said, each one of the school board members is required by law to go to visit each one of the schools in the district on an annual basis. So we're not just doing this in a vacuum. right? We've been there. We've walked the halls, we walked down to the basement. I walked with Sharon Hill throughout every crevice of the building. And I will say, and I think Mr. Maddie also mentioned it, that unfortunately, because Green Acres was waiting for so long for the renovations and expansion and the repurposing of the space that wasn't properly being used or optimally being used for education for so long, that I think unfortunately it did require a little more care, more attention, and I think that's what all of this is really, what we're really intending to do. But I think we relied upon our experts in telling us that structurally the building is sound, right? And it really is. I mean, it's an historical building. It's a beautiful building, and I think the moisture issues can be solved. The problems with the moisture in the basement can be more permanently solved with a commercial grade dehumidification system. So I think we did try to take all those things into account, and hopefully, we can change that sense in the community.
Good evening, my name is John Auerbacher. I live in Quaker Ridge, and I'd like to thank you for the clearly extensive efforts you've put into this. Can I ask, what do you estimate the cost per household from the lowest assessed house to the highest assessed house is on an annual basis of the bond?
I've had that at the top of my head. I might have it though.
5,600 households, $9.3 million.
Need to say 5 million was the estimate, or 5.3 million, I think.
Right, that's the debt service.
The debt service, but there's principal.
Right. Right. Well, that's principally interest.
Oh, it is.
Right, and that's fitting into an existing drop that's coming up. So they fit in, and that would keep you level for that component out of your budget. And your budget has many, many line items for the general fund, and these are the two items for principal and interest. So that would be consistent going through. It would not be an increase.
I don't think I have that.
Yeah, I mean, is there a idea of, I mean, if you divide 5.3 million by 5,300 houses, it's $1,000 a year, would that be about right?
But again, not necessarily increase. It's not a decrease, but it's
just what the cost is of the total tax bill. Is that fair to, thank you.
And you have businesses and vacant land that also share in the property tax too, right?
Yeah.
So you'd have to spread it across the full valuation of the district?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Asking as a financially naive person.
If you want to leave your email, we can get you that information.
Okay.
And I'll be
Please.
happy to post that. Anything you send me, any questions, I'll be happy to post it on the Scarsdale Forum website as well, and I'll send it around.
Yeah. So if in the course of construction the costs increase or probably unlikely decrease, what happens to the 65 million that's raised? Yeah, and sort of in that same question, the bonds are sold serial bonds, so it's not like you sell 65 million, put it in the bank, and then pay it out over the couple of years. Could you just explain the detail of that a little more for me?
Right, so the process that we'll go through, and I thank you for asking that question because we didn't really get into the process, but you're right, upon a positive voter referendum next week, the architect takes 6, 8, 10 months to get into state ed. State ed may take 6, 8, 10 months for approval. And then once you have your approval, architect and construction manager will begin the bidding process for the contracts. And one of the key things I'll ask them is, I need to have a cash flow to know how many dollars they're going to spend on a month-by-month basis. And we'll determine then what might those initial borrowings might be. And we'll start off on what we call a bond anticipation note, and then convert those over to serial bonds after typically a year or two. We can only go 5 years on notes anyway by law, maximum, but we'll convert the notes over to bonds. But everything will be phased to to match up with the construction dollars going out. Again, because you borrow and today's investment rates are much lower. So we really want to minimize the borrowing time frame to match up with exactly the construction dollars going out. So maybe it would be 15 million, 25 million, and then a remaining piece, but we'll have to see how that turns out over a number of years. So we may end up with 2, 3, or 4 serial bonds over time, but again, we'll step into those. The initial projections we've done now assume that we borrowed all $65 million on day one of SED approval. We know that's not going to be the case. We will phase into it, which will actually lower our interest projections than what I have here. What I have here is really the worst case, but it's the most conservative case because I don't know the cash flow yet. A second component of our projections are that we've assumed 0 interest earnings, but you will make interest earnings as you do the borrowings. Again, like I said, if you start off on $15 million, maybe might be the first one. We're not spending all that on day one. That'll be at least over that first year. So there will be interest earnings that you make, and IRS regulations say that we have to use those toward the interest expense, which again helps lower all the projections. So we're starting off on the high side to start with. I don't know if that helps answer those.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
I think the other part was maybe what happens, with our budget, on the construction budget. So contingencies are built into the project. So these are not obviously, that widget costs $1. We're budgeting $1. It's $1 plus the soft costs plus, what if this happens or that happens? What if the design's off a little bit? So there's contingencies built into that to offset, those unknowns. The board, if authorized, not legally allowed to spend more than that bond authorization. So you'll recall in this current year's budget, our last bond was projected to come in over budget based on the bids that were received. It was over the original estimates. So we asked the community as part of our our budget process for 17-18 to include about $1.7 million. So that had to be approved by the community in order to help offset the total cost of the project.
Okay. And then my final question and comment, I would assume that by not demolishing a gigantic school, that by maintaining it, you actually are exhibiting some environmental sustainability, because what do you do with all that debris? I would assume that's correct, right? Okay.
Not only that, but the resources and energy that went into creating it are not then happening again.
Thank you so much.
Does anybody have any further questions? Any other comments?
I see one back here.
Hi. We had hoped that by now probably ask all the questions, but here tonight I actually have even more questions. I have 3 questions if I'm allowed to do it.
Please.
Thank you. So these are my questions are around the overall vision. And what is the long-term plan? What is the long-term vision for Scarsdale Schools? And how does that vision, how does the bond plan fit into that vision? Are we looking for, how do we elevate our Scarsdale School from where we are to the next level? Is it flexible space? What is it that the children need? Again, I don't know, but I'm sure the people who know. Is it air conditioning? Is it cafeteria? Is it more multi-purpose rooms? What are those that the vision the board has, and how does that plan? How does this plan out? This bond? And do you want me to ask all 3 questions in the answer, or? Go.
Do it one by one.
Yeah, one by one, yeah. Well,
Okay, go ahead.
in terms of 21st century vision, one thing that I know we've heard a lot about, which you mentioned, is the flexible space. And the use of space is going to be very important as classes now meet together. So there's 2 classes perhaps meeting together, so they'll need a bigger space. There's small group work where they can spread out. and work in smaller groups, which isn't as easy in a smaller classroom, so you can bring them into a multi-purpose space. Particularly, 2 multi-purpose rooms are important at Green Acres because you want to split into 2 lunches. The 3 lunches is just very inflexible and really limits programming. But then in terms of the flexible learning commons, the opportunities there for presentations, performances, and learning opportunities completely aligns with 21st century, what do they call it, personalized learning, which is really small group and individual and differentiation.
Again, I don't want to focus on Green Acres again. I want to kind of think about
absolutely.
the overall
so you know about
district,
STEP,
right? So,
you know about STEP 2.0, right? Scarsdale education
right.
for tomorrow.
The problem is like they're just looking to start from bottom up, and even here, right? We're having all of this. We're talking about boilers and burners and this and that, and then I just don't see how is that elevating our education.
So infrastructure makes sense to you, right?
It does, but do we do
and
flexible spaces? Weren't we replacing this with these flexible spaces at Edgewood or Fox Meadow?
there certainly has not been a determination not to do any work anywhere.
Have you thought about it?
It's been when the architects originally submitted their initial drawings for each building, they certainly brought up opportunities at every elementary school to add additional storage space, which is critical to look at different uses of the classrooms and the components of the classrooms, like storage in the classrooms, get things off the floor, get them higher so you could use the existing classrooms better, and to add flexible space, rooms with dividing walls or just bigger spaces that can be flexible with flexible furniture at all the schools. So those are still out there and opportunities.
And there are model rooms at a number of the other schools that have already the starts of flexible furniture and things like that. And the other thing I would say is there have been over the past years, bond proposals and other things at the other schools that have in fact added common spaces, that have added other things, which Green Acres has lacked. And I think that, part of the vision I think that you've seen in the sense of flexibility and common space, and we're not saying that's not going to happen at other schools. I mean, I don't know if you've been to the new learning commons in the high school, for instance, but if you go there, I mean, just go there and watch what is going on. It is truly amazing. I mean, you've got students in there that are group working, that are dining together, that are eating together, that are talking, that are learning together. That's part of the vision. It's not the entire vision, but having these common spaces. When you talk to Sharon Hill at Green Acres, and you hear that there's literally the lack of spaces preventing curriculum from going forward, that's a concern that we have to address. With respect to the other schools, each of them had needs that we've tried to address over the years. We've had bond proposals and additions at the middle school, right? At the high school, at Quaker Ridge, at other schools. So, it's happening. It may not be happening as fast for every school, as you would like, but clearly Green Acres has been behind the 8 ball here, so I think we had to do that. But from our perspective, that doesn't mean things stop. And it doesn't mean that there isn't room in our operating budget, okay, or in future bonds to do things in other schools. But the bottom line is we have priorities. We've got, the board did not want to go out at this time with a bond that significantly was not tax neutral. Right now we're pretty well taxed, in this community, and there are a number of people out there that look and they see things like the recent tax legislation and other things. So we want to be very sensible about that, and that doesn't mean. And one of the questions that was asked in the questions that were given to us by the Education Committee was, if you're doing this, does that leave any wiggle room for other things down the line? The answer is yes. I mean, we have an operating budget. There are already things in the operating budget that we're doing facilities-wise, that we're proposing for next year. One of them is Butler Field. I mean, that's not in the budget, but it's in our budget for, it's not in the bond, but it's in our budget coming up. So there will be those opportunities. The only other thing I would say when you talk about the boilers and things like that, if you're going to learn and you're going to have students learning, you've got to learn in a safe, secure, and ADA compliant, environment. So that's part of the plan as well.
Actually, my second question just comes exactly on the kind of, the idea around including boilers and burners into the bond, because it feels to me that we're getting with this bond, we're buying boilers and burners that we're going to pay way after the useful life of those boilers is already gone, because they have whatever useful 10 and 12, that's what usually they tell us. And then we were going to pay for this way down the line. Is this a good even policy instead of actually doing flexible spaces at Foxwood? Is this a good policy, governmental policy to actually, I probably do use the analogy, you borrow the bonds to fix this winter's potholes, or you actually repay them in the road?
I want to talk about the life expectancy of the boilers.
Yeah, I mean, these
we can go, you don't have to stick on the boiler, because I can go through even, little ones, there's all of those security camera and all of this. If we're gonna be paying back over 17 years or 30 years? 17. So that camera is not gonna be there in 17 years, so it's not.
That may be true for particularly smaller items in the bond, but here's what I would say in response. Let me respond. So what I would say is, there are items that we are doing in this bond, because we're doing so much work across the district, that it is cost effective to include in the bond A, because of the amount of work. But B, it also allows you to accomplish work in such a fashion so that if you didn't otherwise bond the work, at low interest rates hopefully, that you would then have emergencies where you would have to pay for it out of an operating budget, which would then potentially take opportunities that you had already hoped to accomplish in your operating budget out, or it would lead to a tax increase for the community in one of these types of fashions. In 2021, 2 boilers fail, we have no choice but to replace them. Or this $500,000 worth of roofing has to be replaced, we have no choice to do it. We don't have that type of wiggle room in our budget to either offset that type of expenses without raising taxes. So either we raise taxes, which I think that, at least personally, I'm very sensitive to keeping taxes predictable for our community. We've certainly heard that to not do that would be a disservice, certainly to those members of our community that are on more fixed income on an annual basis. So I think that a bond, in my eyes, is a sensible way to attack certainly the construction piece. To me, that's a no-brainer. But it also allows us to do things like boilers and roofs on a planned-out basis for the ones that we know need to be replaced, so we're not caught in a situation where we're making decisions of can we introduce more STEAM programs or not, or do we have to raise taxes by 7%? That to me is not a decision I would want to make. I don't think the community would want to make it, and quite frankly, I think we'd be much better served by having it in a bond.
And simply put, I think it gives us much more flexibility in our operating budget to deal with teaching and learning, which we obviously want to do.
And I believe it's sound business advice, and in fact is sound business advice to pay for these big ticket items along their useful lives in chunks as you use them. So instead of paying, $26 million for heating, ventilation, electrical upgrades, roofs, boilers, burners, huge ticket items that last a long time, we will be able to pay for them in chunks as they're used. It actually is sound business sense.
But it's also useful if you put those in the operating budget, because for all of us as taxpayers, whether I'm paying it in a bond principal of interest or I'm paying through the operating budget, it's just a left pocket, right pocket that comes out of for taxes. So whether you put this into operating budget and then you put actually bigger ticket items, that you cannot do a Fox Meadow, a flexible space with on an operating budget. Then that one you can spread out the same over years. It's a left pocket, right pocket. That's what I just don't understand.
It's a predictable pocket, which I think is, from where I sit, much more important than left pocket and right pocket.
And also, I think the point that we're losing, a little bit lost in this too, is that these projects become aidable. So for every dollar we're spending for these types of things, we're getting 19.5 cents back from the state, which is much more than the interest.
Which you would not get,
right?
If
you put it in your
operating budget.
Are there tax cap implications there too?
In the operating budget.
Well,
yes,
if it's in the operating budget, it counts toward the cap. It's in the bond.
That's
exactly correct.
That's right. So you've got low interest rates, you've got the ability to take advantage of the state aid, so all those things come into it as well.
And you can't put any of the education programming into the bond. Like you couldn't put teacher
Cannot do that.
salaries or
Right.
anything like
Can't do
that.
salaries,
So
new
this actually
programs.
frees up the operating budgets for that. Instead of filling the operating budgets with boilers, you're allowing opportunity for educational programming, STEM programs. I mean, I don't even know, teacher salaries, other things that you want to add. You know, we got, I think, reading specialists. You know, there's been things that you can't put into the bond. Is that true? I mean,
Yes, that's absolutely true. Thank you.
I don't want to-
Great to see you here.
So my last question is, Scarsdale Education Forum actually done an intensive study last year, and went and polled the constituents and analyzed the information, what type of things that they think it's important. They ask educators, yet none of their recommendations they're in here. How do you explain that?
Can you give an example?
Yeah, can you give an example?
So one of the most important things it was air conditioning, and then there are like a lot of a list of category items with criteria, but like air conditioning decided no.
Okay, well, let's, I mean, I can at least try to respond to the air conditioning. Air conditioning came up in the discussion fairly late. It was discussed at the building committee level, right, at the district-wide committee level. We did get, in fact, estimates for various air conditioning options to put air conditioning in just our instructional spaces across the district. I think the estimate was $23 million. The board did at one of its meetings discuss the possibility of either considering that in this bond as part of the bond, to in it, or as a separate bond. But the board felt that it would be a rushed decision, that it wasn't ready to make that decision. We did studies on the number of days that it impacted, and I think, what was the number, in the 30s? Somewhere in the 30s, and it would really impacted 30 days. And frankly, I think the board, looked at it and said, okay, $23 million for air conditioning across the district, given the other priorities that we have at this time, was not the way to go at this moment. And that doesn't mean that you'll never have air conditioning. It doesn't mean that at some point, it doesn't mean that at some point we may say, hey, community, do you want to spend $23 million, on a bond to have air conditioning district-wide? And I think what the board said was, we'll look at that, but just not right now. That given the other priorities that we have, given what we know we have to do, given the lag behind of Green Acres, that we were not prepared at this moment to take on that issue. And then there were other issues like food service, which we are taking on. You've got committees. Look, there are priorities out there, and we have to. It's not an easy task. You've elected a board of 7, and we have an administration that works very hard to consider these priorities and do it. Is everyone going to be on the same page about every priority? No. We think we did a good job. We're not saying that we're never going to consider air conditioning. In fact, I think every board member said that's something we should talk about. But, given the fact that we're all working 20 hours a week on all these kind of projects, it just wasn't the time to do it, given the priorities.
Should we postpone the vote?
I'm sorry?
Should we postpone the vote so that we can actually look at it?
I don't think that's where the board came out. The board has that we have important things and priority items that need to get done. We have Green Acres that needs to get done. As far as the air conditioning, I don't think anyone on the board was prepared at that point to say, let's postpone the vote or not move forward on these items that we all agree, are priority items that need to go forward and should go forward, but we did not have agreement, on air conditioning as being that issue that should be presented at this point.
And Gabriel, I would say that every time that we go out to the community and ask for a vote, whether it be an annual budget or a bond, it's a snapshot in time. I think this is where we are right now with this vote. We will be at another vote in May on our annual budget. There's nothing any information that we get along the way we've factored into the bond referendum in our consideration. But at some point we have to call the question. And I think we've called the question for this bond referendum with all the information that we had at the time. I believe giving the best proposal for the community with all the information we have. We are aware of $60 million worth of work that isn't being addressed in this bond. We are aware that there's food service conversations going on, sustainability conversations going on, air conditioning conversations going on, and my guess is that there will be building committee conversations going on, and that will tell us that not only do we want flexible space, but we want X, or we want Y. It's things that we may not even have thought of yet. And I think that we can only, at each juncture, do the best we can with what information we have and make a sensible proposal at the time.
It's an iterative and ongoing process, but we think we're at the right place right now for this time.
Thank you. My only comment to what you just mentioned is that we are spending $65 million and we don't have that chance for a very long time. And in my opinion, it's worth to actually take that extra time to actually figure out how rightly we want to spend it. That's where I want to reduce.
Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
And I would just say one thing, what you just said. That's true in terms of debt service rolling off. But this community supports its schools, has historically. There's nothing to say that a bond proposal between February of 18 and sometime in 2026, that doesn't mean that we can't do another bond. Who knows? I don't know what federal tax legislation will be. I mean, there's a lot of unknowns, but I don't think it necessarily means it has to be a long time to the next one, but obviously without giving you any assurance that there will be, I just don't know.
Right.
But that would be the debt service roll-off. It doesn't mean there could be a community-wide support potentially for a new issuance for whatever the projects may be.
Right.
It's just one financing mechanism, just one,
No,
for projects that are all legitimate projects.
I agree, but the first slide right there that we, right now, with this, we can embrace is tax neutrality. And now kind of the board coming back and say, like, well, we might actually ask for not bonds. I don't know, there are two sides that I just can't put them together.
Well, I think if in conversations with the community, there's a real desire to look at air conditioning, right, for instance, then that would be something that perhaps we would consider doing in a separate bond. I mean, but from our perspective, we couldn't get there, given the priorities that we had. And that's where it is. But thank you for your comments, it's really appreciated.
Thank you.
Good evening, Tony Corriggio, Bright Avenue. Probably known to many as a voice of dissent, and I appreciate the opportunity for us to actually come and speak as well. It's greatly appreciated, very magnanimously. As you know, we've been really advocating for the safety of the kids a lot. We proposed a lot of things, initiatives to help those kids that will have to go through this renovation. Many were rejected, some were accepted. But what I really wanted to do here tonight, recognizing the broader Scarsdale audience, was to kind of try to remove myself as a parent of young kids at Green Acres and put myself back into any one of the other districts and say, as a taxpayer, what's going on with Green Acres and why should we be spending this much money on Green Acres? Please tell me again why that's happening. We had a lot of discussion here about the history of Green Acres and why it's been postponed. It's been postponed. Everybody's been debating this for several bond issuances as to what should happen with Green Acres. And I think the decision about what should happen with Green Acres has been around whether it should be renovated or whether there should be a new school, given the problems that that school has. Let me be very clear. What the voices of dissent have been saying is we're not demanding a new school. What we have been demanding is the analysis of a new school. I can be very easily persuaded, given an appropriate analysis, that the renovation is a more cost-effective, better investment. But as it stands here today, after 3 years, we don't have that analysis. And I think I hold in my hand, and I'm happy I have extra copies for anybody, and there's no editing. I think I have the only piece of paper ever generated by BBS to analyze the cost of new schools. It's one page. It's this many spreadsheet lines. Can be built in about 5 minutes. And I would ask him, he put a ton of work into the renovation strategy. I would ask how much work went into this. It's going to be, 1% of the work that went into the other decision. And I want to read to you what it says. New school, $37 million. Site work, $5 million. And I'm summarizing the major headlines. New school, $37 million. Site work, $5 million. That's $42 million. Fees and contingencies, $17 million, for a total of $59.3 million. Okay, 17 million of fees and contingencies, and this being the only analysis ever given, I don't think was acceptable to the community as a result of a 3-year process. We had KG&D produced some drawings and a plan for the new school that came out at $52.9 million, and they were going down. They were value engineering that, and they got fired. And then we had to pause to look at these again, and we came out and we were told by the architects they were not asked. It's on tape. They were not asked to look at a new school. And then we got this analysis, and that's it. So I asked my fellow taxpayers, and I don't like to pay any more taxes than necessary either. I'm an investment professional. I want to make the right investment. But if you had a Camry, that's 20 years old that you loved, and you're being told it takes $40,000 to overhaul that thing, you'd go and see what $40,000 could buy you if you could buy a new Camry for $40,000. Okay? And I would add, if you were going to overhaul it, make a decision to spend $40,000 to overhaul it, you wouldn't do it with your kids in the back seat. But also, the point of, can we get something of better investment value that again addresses all the needs of Green Acres for the next 30 years, right? Let's name a number. Let's $45 million, right? Because I can add up $45 million from the current renovation. We got the 37 and the 3, and then I think you have roofs. You get to, you can get to $44 million over the course of 15 years with this renovation. What does $45 million buy me on the site across the field that we own and take care of Green Acres for the next 30 years? Done. All the new energy efficient HVAC. You'd be saving a lot of money on energy. You'd have all your classrooms the right size. You wouldn't have giant ones out front and tiny ones in the back, trying to average them out to something that made sense with a strange median for those in math. There's an analysis to be done, and it hasn't been done. And that is one of the major points of the process flaw that people are identifying. They just want that answer. And because I sent you a letter, that for $30,000, you could get another architect to come in and give you a proposal, and for another $5,000, give you some drawings, and the community could know for a fact what a new school costs on that site at X size, and whether that could be value engineered to something that makes sense, and then everybody could be discussing it and decide which is the best investment value. So I would ask you, you mentioned that there was 2 consultants that verified this. Is there any more work than this ever produced on the school? And did anything that I said there make sense in terms of wanting to evaluate this option further? And I may not get the right answer or get an answer from the board, but I would ask the public just to consider that as they go to the voting booths. And I really do appreciate the time you just gave me.
Thanks. I think Mr. Maddy and others can address at least some of your questions. But I will also say that, as I said in my opening statement, and as you yourself mentioned, there was analysis and drawings done back in June of 2016, which are different than the ones you were holding in your hand. So that's at least some other information that is out there. But I'll let you go and, I think you want to talk about the numbers and how they were arrived at? Or?
Okay, where to begin? So, lots of facets to that I'll try to address. First of all, in terms of costs in general, it's one of our jobs to know how much things cost. I can absolutely do that. Okay, hello. So in terms of costs, it is one of our jobs to understand how much things cost, because that's part of the decision-making process. There are other parts, and I'll get to those in a minute. So in terms of cost per square foot, usually at the beginning of any process of building new or renovating, when you first start and you're in planning, you first try to understand what it is that you're trying to build, how big it might be based upon the number of students that might be in it, and what type of expectation of the educational program would be facilitated through that building. We also did have a lot of reference material backwards to buildings that were drawn on the site. We had that to reference. We could look at that. No matter where we are talking about a new building, we would start with a page that says, well, how large would this building be? Behind that would be a bunch of analysis, which we did, about relative size and how big it might want to be. We were pretty close in size to the last iteration from the previous architect in terms of how large that building might be. We did have numbers to compare to from the previous new building estimates from 2016 that when escalated to bids in 2019 or so, we're pretty much where we are, $59 to $60 million, getting to the cost per square foot being the average, being equal between the two, even though their building was slightly larger. For other reasons, like there's a larger gym, there's other conversations that went on, obviously, to that plan. The same kind of understanding of the marketplace, understanding of school construction in New York State, in Westchester, in the New York City area, informed how we know, based on a tremendous amount of experience in this field, how much things would cost to be able to anticipate, to get a rough idea of the magnitude of expenditure to what you would expect something to be. So you expect a school of 75 to 80,000 square feet. How much might that be a square foot? What components of that, when you break it down, can you ascribe to new construction? In this particular project, also costs of demolishing an existing school, if you could even do that. I'll get back to that. Then regrading all of where the school is now into fields. Yes, still on the other side of the street. Just throwing that out there too. And also what would be the site work and other work associated just with the new building on the 6-acre piece, which is now fields. In terms of fees and contingencies, yeah, there are general conditions in that have to do with contractor overhead, things like that, insurances. There is at least 10% of contingency worked into that over time, or of either scope creep or things that might come up. There's another 5% in escalation. We have to think about this. As mentioned before and in other conversations, 65 million as the number, if there's a bond, that's it. You can't spend more than that. Once the voters authorize it, that's it. So when you get into contingencies, and then there is a fee part of that too, which is a much smaller component, and there are only soft costs too. All the other things that the district has to do in terms of everything, attorneys, bond counsel, printing even, all of that. Furniture, consultants, testing, all of that. Those are all part of that component, which is a large component. So back to how you structure an estimate like that. You start with a straightforward raw cost, $500 a square foot starting point. You add all the percentages and fees to that. You add site work, you understand those components of a building, and you get a very good idea of the magnitude of expenditure attached to a building of that size. Built in this location, built for this school district and its level of expectation of what it will accept as an educational facility. That's all in there. So our first objective was to come up with those numbers for ourselves for that project, then comparing back, across, sideways, construction manager, understanding the market, knowing the history, following bids. Our company does have over $3 billion worth of experience in construction in New York State in the K-12 market, so we do know what we're talking about. So we can make that bold assumption to say this is about the magnitude of what you could expect, because we have the background to be able to do that. I think that addresses most of that. The other component that has nothing to do with money, and I'll start just by the building itself. Green Acres itself is perfectly suited to be renovated and used, and expanded, and absolutely affected and shaped by the desired educational program that was developed outside of it and then infused and layered onto that building to then determine what that building had to do to respond and be able to accommodate that program. So we started touching on a few things. There's more than just space being added. There's more than just painting the walls and putting in new ceilings. Every aspect of that building has been rethought. Where is the administrative wing? Does that make sense? Where's the nurse? Does the nurse have an ADA toilet? Where are all the supports? Where are the lower level grades, and how do they function as a piece? We didn't get into it all, and it's a big part. in terms of Scarsdale and where you guys want to go. So we had so many meetings at so many levels with directors and everyone about even how taking makerspace, library, computer, fusing those together and taking what's currently a fragmented reality to those. The makerspace is living in a little closet about on the other side of the building from the library. So it almost doesn't have a chance to really collaborate with the library and everything that's going on there. So one of many sub-themes to this is let's gather the spaces to allow the programs to evolve. Let's make sure, see how, test the building, what can it handle, what things have to move, what can get next to each other, what are the adjacencies, what gets added, what gets subtracted. All those types of things have all been part of this process. And alongside that is the constant calculation of how much will this cost. So it's all happening at the same time. I hope that addresses that there's a lot more depth behind a spreadsheet or 10, because those are just indicators of the financial impact of much greater decisions. Is that good?
But there was also, our analysis also, when we did a comparison.
Right, and as part of the determination and making the recommendation to the Board of Education was, looking at the finances over time and the absolute true cost of interest rates, a much larger project on the taxpayer, measuring out all the different maintenance costs, energy costs, savings that might be associated with the new building versus savings that might be generated by an older building with LED, what the additional cost because it is an older building. All those things are worked in to the financial analysis, and that data is available on the website as well. And essentially, one of the handouts here showing the end results of the analysis.
Good evening, Robert Berg, 32 Tisdale Road. Thank you very much for coming tonight. I'm glad you came to the forum event. This is what we do. We provide information to the community. This has been a great opportunity for the community to ask questions. You guys have been very forthright with your answers, and I appreciate that. There's been a lot of fake news floating around in the community, and I found your answers very, very helpful and open tonight. I'm a big supporter of this bond. I've already voted since I may be out of town next week, but I've been out and about town trying to convince my neighbors and friends to come out and support the bond by voting yes next week. Now, in particular, I've been trying to convince my non-Green Acres friends why they should come in and support the bond. And I've been getting a little bit of pushback, and they say, why should I give Green Acres so much money in this bond? I can understand the infrastructure needs, and that goes to all the different schools around the district. But why Green Acres? Why are they getting so much money here? Why is it worth my while? Particularly the empty nesters are saying, look, if I vote no here, particularly with SALT being eliminated, all the state and local tax deductions being eliminated, I'm sure eventually they'll get the infrastructure repairs done, and I can get probably a tax cut of my school taxes. So why should I come out and support this? What can you say which will make my job easier, getting these people to come out and vote yes?
So the first thing I would say is this is a community as a whole and not one of 5 school districts. If we were one of 5 school districts, I think that type of attitude would be expected and prevalent. I would say that Green Acres, like other districts or other elementary school areas, have supported bonds for the other schools over the years, whether it be Quaker Ridge, clearly the middle school and high school in the 2014 bond, as well as significant additions at Heathcote and Edgewood. To me, that is a sense of a community that we live in. It's not always about what's going to, in my backyard. It's how can this overall help the community and the school district. So that's one aspect of it. I don't think counting on a tax deduction or reduction because the debt service will roll off and maybe a $65 million bond is not there to replace it. I would suggest with the amount of work that the district and the board have identified as needs will have to be paid out of something. And if that means it would have to be paid out of the operating budget, I think that you would see that $5 million line item that currently goes to principal and interest surprisingly might be used for things like capital projects. And obviously some very serious ones, whether it be in a bond for infrastructure or not, all this stuff I think we believe needs to get done and we have prioritized it. So whether you pay for that in a bond or you pay for it in capital projects in the operating budget, my sense is that we would at least be proposing budgets to the community that would be using up some of that hopeful reduction that I'm not so sure will materialize. Who knows what will happen? I may not be on the board at that time, but I think that would be a wise and prudent way to pay for these projects on a going forward basis, on a one-off way of using up that line item. So those are at least two of my initial reactions to your question.
Anyone else? Okay, and we're happy to continue. I know you had indicated we're finishing at 9. It's 9:40. I mean, for others, we're certainly here.
Last question.
Right, now my understanding is that so long as the lights don't get turned off, I certainly am thrilled that all of you are participating. This is a great exchange of ideas, so by all means, keep going if you still have the stamina, and we thank you for it. Next question, please.
Shisu from Green Acres. Thank you all for the very helpful information tonight. I know this discussion about Green Acres has been going on for 3 years, since the KG&D first proposed basically 2 options: building a new one in the field, demolish the old one, or renovation expansion in 2014. And I think the board has made the right decision for the whole community, including Green Acres, and also this plan is very fiscally responsible. I have to mention that I looked up your website. You have so much information out there. And from 2000, there have been 137 million facility work in the whole district, and Green Acre has got the lowest amount received, about 3.55%. 3.55% is 4.87 million. So we have waited for a very long time. And of all the work you have done, the construction work, over all the years, there are so many projects with expansion or renovation. It has always been safe to all the kids. So I think it's rational to believe this project, you also put the children's safety of your paramount importance when you're planning all the things, including, the architect. And I think it's rational to believe it will be safe. I have a specific question to the architect, actually, about the new construction, because it's going to be on the side of the gym, right? That new construction. So will the gym still be in use during the new construction? How would you separate, the construction area with the gym if being used? And were you planning on putting air conditioning there as well as you already did to the library? That's my question.
Okay, I think I missed a little part of that, but sorry. The gym, the separation of the gym to the new construction, right? Essentially, and there's not a plan for air conditioning in the gym. However, there is fresh air generated in there beyond just the windows, which are not always opened. But I know part of the plan, especially with the construction manager, is the first part that would happen is the windows, as they are taken away out of the gym, would be blocked up with masonry, and therefore really a solid wall away from the construction.
Will it be used during construction?
The gym would be used during construction, yes.
Yep, it'll be separated from the construction area by the solid wall.
And currently the gym does not have an exterior door, so there won't be any blockage of existing egress. And just to let you know, part of the construction implementation plan is to create a barrier hallway that is the hallway between, right by the gymnasium now, to the classrooms across, going all the way across from the old multi-purpose room, all the way to the library, and that will be the egress during construction for students who would normally come out of the front of the building towards Huntington.
The skylights in the gym, is that being done in the summer?
Yeah, within the gymnasium itself, there'll be renovations that will happen during the summer. So during the summer will be the change of the outside wall, the windows being removed, and we are going to leave the architecturally the sense that those archways and et cetera are still there, so there's an architectural presence of that. And again, just as an aside, we're replicating those windows on the front of the learning commons so that they have informed the architecture of the new addition. But there will be skylights also installed into the gymnasium for some natural light, and that will also be a summer project.
So you will put the skylight during the summer?
Yes.
Before the kids come back?
Correct. Nothing will happen in there inside the space while the children are in the school.
And may I ask, where would the fresh air be coming in, into the gym?
Up above.
Up above.
And again, there's filtration that's been approved for all of the air intakes, all of the fresh air intakes in the building, so that to mitigate the concern that there would be airborne particles that would then be drawn in by the mechanical systems. So there's already been identification of a way to mitigate that issue.
And that's a similar setup to all of our other buildings as well. None of our gyms have air conditioning, and many of them don't have windows that open. The mechanical fresh air system, actually Heathcote, part of the project scope in this project would be to actually provide mechanical fresh air in the Heathcote gym because they currently don't have it.
Don't have it.
So we'll be getting them up to speed on that.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Kim Leibowitz. I'm a Green Acres resident. I don't really have a question. I would like to actually say thank you very much for the work you've done. I think that there's a lot of complicated information here. There's, I think, understanding what you're doing takes an understanding of compromise, science, math, economics. I think the compromise is a big piece of it. I moved to Green Acres, how old is my daughter? My daughter is 11. So we moved to Green Acres 12 years ago, and part of what sold us on Green Acres was its historical character, and its beautiful green field, and the gorgeous elementary school that sold us on that neighborhood, which is part of what I have stood up for during the past 3.5 years that I have participated in this process. This has made me an uncomfortable participant in a political process in this neighborhood. And I've kind of put myself out there, which I don't love having to do, but I think you sometimes have to stand up for the right thing. Actually, it's funny you should mention a 20-year-old Camry, because we happen to drive a 15-year-old Camry that I just fixed last week, which in fact does speak to, I think, some of the values here. I think it's important to repair the old when it is repairable, when we can make something beautiful. We don't tear our homes down. When they need new kitchens or new bathrooms, we fix them. And I appreciate all you've done. And sorry I don't have a question to add. You've answered a lot.
Any more questions? Great, well, thank you very much for this exchange. It's wonderful to have such a diversity of ideas. I welcome you to join the Education Committee. I have all kinds of political views in my group, all kinds of professions, demographics. We collaborate, we're still alive, and we're thrilled that you were able to come. We will be posting the video on the Scarsdale Forum site, and it will also be on multiple local social media. Thank you very much, Brian, for coming from Greenberg to video this. We really appreciate it. Of course, thank you very much to Vice President of the Forum, John Mark in the back, and ML Perlman, the President, who's been in the back, and of course, to all of our panelists. Thank you very much for your participation. Good night.
I'd like to thank again the Forum and the Forum's Education Committee for inviting us. Again, public discourse, public information, very important to the board, and thank you all for coming. And for those of you who will be watching at home, thank you again. And if you have questions, please don't be afraid to ask them. We're here. We have a board meeting Monday night.
And ML Perlman wants to make sure that all of you turn up to Winterfest on Saturday And I just got February 3rd, and I just got a babysitter, so we'll be able to go. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, everybody.